Hey there, I'm Matea Roach. Welcome to Bookends. Madeleine Thien is a major Canadian storyteller. Her novel, Do Not Say We Have Nothing, won the Giller Prize and the Governor-General's Literary Award back in 2016. And it was also shortlisted for both the Booker and the Women's Prize for Fiction. In that novel, and in all of her writing, Madeleine explores big historical moments on an intimate scale, from China's Cultural Revolution to genocide in Cambodia. Her work probes the connections between past and present, personal and political. As Madeleine has said herself, she doesn't see history as separate from the present moment. And in her latest novel, The Book of Records, she takes up this project in a totally new way. With this story, she questions the very nature of time, asking, how do we engage with great thinkers of the past, and what can they teach us about how to live now? I explored all of these ideas and so many more when I spoke to Madeleine Thien from a studio in New York City. Hi, Madeleine. How are you?
I'm well. Hi, Matea. It's wonderful to be here.
Your new novel begins in this building called The Sea. It's a mysterious place. It's not totally clear where it's located, but we know it looks out over an ocean or body of water. And it's kind of a refugee enclave. It's a place that people escape to. Can you tell me a bit more about this setting and why you made it such an ambiguous place?
Mm-hmm. The Sea is a place that there's a little girl named Lena, and her father tells her that this enclave, which is made of buildings that seem to pass through each other, is made of time. And it seems to be a place where people arrive but try not to stay because there's nothing there for them to build a future. Lena and her father are unable to continue for many reasons. Her father is not well enough to continue on, but they always think that they will be leaving soon. It turns out she stays there for 7 years. I was really always interested in this idea that space and time are one, that the physics that the physics tell us, or that they describe time and space as being a continuum, as time is not being an absolute thing, and that our experience of time as being a very human experience of a very specific thing. Mm. And I wanted to think about what it feels like when space is time.
Mm. What would it mean for a building to be made of time, as Lena's father explains to her? Because it's a very metaphysical concept. I think for me, who's not a mathematician, it's a bit hard to wrap my head around.
Yes, I found that, there's some people that immediately leap at this idea and are like, yes, of course. And others are like, but what do you mean, really? Lena's father describes it to her as a piece of string that keeps folding over itself like a constellation knot. And really what it is a crossroads of history. It's in some ways the way that we hold history inside ourselves. It's the way that many centuries, many ideas, many philosophers, many words inhabit the space of our bodies. Mm. In a way, everyone has a kind of sea within themselves. And as a novelist, one tries to imagine what that would be like in a concrete sense.
I thought of the sea as I was reading. It's essentially a refugee camp in a way, that it's home to these people that are transiting through, that in many cases seem to be fleeing something, although we don't always know what. Were you thinking about any real places of refuge or refugee experiences at all while you were writing this book?
Yes, very much. Physically, I thought a lot about Kowloon Walled City, which used to exist in Hong Kong. It was a former outpost of the Chinese military centuries ago. And then when the British took control of Hong Kong, this piece of land was not in their control. It still remained with China. And so people who needed a place to live or didn't have proper papers or were refugees or for various reasons needed to disappear, they ended up on this piece of land over which the British had no control, and China was too distant. And they made this structure of, over time, over decades, 300 buildings that loop through each other because nobody was really an architect or an engineer. People just built as necessity demanded. And this enclave existed just a few minutes away from where my mother grew up. But by the time I first went to Hong Kong, it had already been demolished, and now it's a park. So I was thinking of the physical structure of Kowloon Walled City and the eternal existence of such places.
I hadn't known the history of Kowloon Walled City as that place of refuge. I knew it as just it. In the time that it existed, I think, was the single most densely populated tract of land anywhere in the world because of that structure where these rooms were being built on top of each other and looping into each other. The central thread in the Book of Records is this story of, as you mentioned, a young girl, Lena, and her father who were forced to leave their home in China and now live in this mysterious building, the Sea. And Lena has a lot of questions for her father about why they're there, what happened to her mother and brother who didn't come with them. Without giving too much away about the story and what Lena discovers and what we discover as readers, can you talk a bit about these characters and what their story is? Like, how did they come to be in the Sea?
I would say that Lena's father is a genius, and he's someone we would think of as a good person, but who is guilty of extraordinarily unethical things. And it's hard for the father to tell this story to Lena, but he also knows that it's something she will need to understand. It's something she'll carry. It will answer some of her questions, but it won't explain the past away. And, you know, the novel moves across these centuries, past and future, and this part with the father is about the cyber world. And it's about a lot about math. And if I'm thinking about space and time and refuge and home and belonging, was not possible for me to not write about the cyber world, which surrounds us and which we live within right now.
Why do you think it was not possible for you to disentangle those things?
We live there and here now. I guess, you know, I really loved your interview with Cory Doctorow. I thought that was such an incredible conversation, and I learned a lot from it, but it echoed a lot of the questions I had about the regulation of the internet, about disinformation, about knowledge, about the vast library and archive, about our behaviors online, and the way we translate between online life and our physical existence. And there's an ethics. There's the ethical questions that have been with us all along are playing out in this space as well in quite brutal ways. So I think, you know, fundamentally it's a book about ethics. And so it inhabits these different times and places to ask, how is a person to live in catastrophic times?
I want to return later on to this idea that this is a novel of ethics and how to live, but I want to stay a little bit longer talking about father-daughter relationships because Lena's father is a complex man, cares a lot for his daughter. You've described your own father as well as being a complicated man in his own way, and I know he passed away a number of years ago. When it comes to the father-daughter bond in the Book of Records, did you find yourself drawing on your relationship with your father at all?
Maybe only in the sense that that there was an exceptional person in which something was unfulfilled, and a loving person. And, you know, my father also had to grow up in the shadow of a father who was executed during the Second World War, a father who was forced to collaborate during wartime occupation and then was killed when the occupation ended by the occupiers because he just knew too much.
Wow.
So these complex relations with the father and this love and the ways in which the father tries to protect the children. And in this case, too, in the Book of Records, the father really thinks that he can hold his family as an exception to the rule. that whatever he does, he tells himself, he's doing to protect what he loves and what is most valuable to him. And yes, probably the complexity and the tragedy, I think, of my father's childhood is probably woven into all my work in some way or another. Those difficult choices and the long shadow of them haunts the work.
Yeah, I'm curious. I think I always have had a sort of penchant for father stories, especially now that my own father has passed away as well. I'm curious to know just more about what kind of a guy your dad was. I know that he was Hakka Chinese, but born in Malaysia, from what I understand, and then later met your mom at university. Like, what was his life trajectory, your father?
Well, he was born in what was British North Borneo and then became part of Malaysia. And he was the youngest child, and eventually he was sent to college in Melbourne, Australia. And there he had met my mother, who was born in China and then brought to Hong Kong as a baby, also during the war. They also were refugees. They came to Canada in 1974, and I think it was extremely difficult. My mother was pregnant with me. They had two children, my siblings. They were, I think this is a story we know, that uprootedness, that profound desire to make a new home, to make a better life for their kids, and the kids who become the translators for the family. I mean, it's a story that we know well in Canada. Mm-hmm. I think my father was the most loving man who tried to find a footing in this continuous uprootedness. We haven't got to it yet, but in the novel there are these series of books, and there's this epigraph that opens all the books. It's Seneca, and it says, "I leave you my one greatest possession, which is the pattern of my life." And I do feel that my parents left me this pattern of their lives that I am kind of in awe of. And I do feel an obligation to it. I feel as a writer, just as a person, an obligation to this remembrance and love, and maybe not being silent in the face of things when I feel something should be said.
That's very beautiful, and I think that does come through in this book. Escaping into literature, reading, writing, storytelling is something that Lena and a number of the other characters we meet in the Book of Records do. And Lena in particular escapes into these 3 books, which are 3 volumes of an encyclopedia series. Before we dive into the content of those books and the people we meet therein, I understand that when you were growing up, books were somewhat scarce in your household. You attended an elementary school that didn't have a library, but you did have Encyclopedia Britannica at home, from what I gather. Were you an encyclopedia reader as a kid? Like, was this somewhat drawing from your own childhood reading?
It's drawn from the intense longing to have books, definitely. I was just thinking about that this morning, actually. What was in the house? The Encyclopedia Britannica, Reader's Digest, condensed books, and issues of Reader's Digest. I read everything. That was lying around. Yes, I read the encyclopedia. I think, my parents felt that given limited resources, what books could they put around that could kind of represent abundance, abundance of reading material. And that was what it was. And yes, I went to the library every weekend and would just sit there looking at whatever I could find.
Yeah, I've read that you, when you were a bit older, like 12, 13, got really into the newspaper archives at the Vancouver Public Library and were looking at the microfiche little canister things. What was it about newspaper archives that appealed to you at that time?
Maybe I was fascinated. I don't know, it's hard in hindsight to know. I do know I was fixated on those spools and winding the tape and watching it flicker before my eyes. And also, when when a 12-year-old sits down in front of the microfilm, the librarians never kick you out. They never ask you to leave. It is a permanent seat. They're just so excited that you're interested in the past. Mm-hmm. My father always read the newspaper. I remember as a child, I loved to sit on his lap while he read the newspaper, the big newspaper, and he'd flip through it, And on the microfilm, it flips. It does that flip thing as you scroll through it. I don't know what I was looking for. I did think that I wanted to be a journalist. I think that probably shows a lot in my work. I really thought that was going to be my path.
Interesting. What do you think made you switch paths from I want to be a journalist to I'm going to be a novelist and a fiction writer?
I think I was also torn in many directions. I'd studied dance for a long time. I started my degree in contemporary dance. I wanted to do everything. I mean, literally the hunger. I just wanted to do everything. I think I had 3 minors and a major. I mean, it was ridiculous, and that's probably why I lost my entrance scholarship and couldn't go to school for a while. But, the hunger was so intense. I didn't have the temperament to be a journalist. I think that became clear to me quite early, as I'm a more retiring person, shy. I just couldn't imagine myself doing the kinds of things that journalism demands and in which a journalist flourishes. But I loved to write. I was interested in the world. I wanted to travel. I was curious. Yeah.
I want to return to the Book of Records because the specific 3 encyclopedia just little entries that Lena reads over and over are about the journeys of these 3 historical figures who I think really embody a lot of what we're talking about here. The political philosopher Hannah Arendt, the 17th century Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza, and the 8th century Chinese poet Du Fu. Why these 3 people in particular to feature in the Book of Records? How did you go about choosing them?
In the book itself, the father says it's random. They're the 3 books he plucked off the shelf in a chaotic moment and threw into a bag, and then they had to leave. For me, the sea housed many different people at many different times. It took me 9 years to write the book, and people kind of moved in and moved out. But I wanted to be true to a question that had been disturbing me for a long time, which was, how had I come to believe the things I believed? What things were so deeply instilled in me that I didn't see them? So on that level, I stayed with writers and philosophers and poets who had meant a lot to me for decades. I suspect the other reason those 3 stayed in the sea and didn't leave, Arendt and Du Fu and Spinoza, is that they have a particular way of writing and something embedded in their poems and philosophies that very much wants to communicate to the non-specialized person. I think for some people that will be surprising to hear about Spinoza, but I think it's a thread that runs through his writings. He believes that truth is a rare and precious thing, and if one comes upon a truth, one should share it. And he believes that we are mortal and finite creatures in an eternal and finite place, and that there are difficult facets to accepting this condition, but that looking at things clearly, trying to find those truths, is something that's available to every single person. It's within everyone's reach. And I think that is what binds the 3 together. They are the ones that I have been in continuous dialogue with for so long. And the study is not to be a follower or to replicate their thought. It is that it's a constant challenge back and forth, me to them to me. And that it makes a historical figure a living being in our thoughts and in our minds. They're alive to us then, There's something about that they have this quality that helps you in this moment. Help, I don't know if help is the right word, accompanies you in this moment.
Yeah, or can speak across time. You know, there's definitely, I am not a big reader of philosophy, but I've read enough bits of different philosophy to have had the experience of reading, say, Hannah Arendt's work and feeling like it can speak to the present moment. I found the segments of the Book of Records where we were spending time with Hannah Arendt perhaps the most compelling, just because of the three philosophers. She's the most recent. She feels the most proximate to me. Hannah Arendt is perhaps best known for this idea of the banality of evil, the idea that evil can be perpetrated by ordinary and unexceptional people. And that's, you know, one of her big philosophical contributions. But I know you've also spent a lot of time with Arendt's letters, and we see her writing letters back and forth in the Book of Records. What is it about her personal letters that you find compelling?
She's extremely witty. She's very sardonic. It's very clear that the things that hurt her the most are the things she finds some need to laugh at them. It's a protective barrier for her. Her work is so much about the act of thinking itself and thinking and action, and she just springs off the page. It's impossible not to. She's such a huge character. She thinks so differently from me, and I think that was the thrill of writing her, was she inhabits such a different temperament than I do, and she's such a force of life. But the primary feeling I have, even when thinking about the letters, and how little she talks about those extremely difficult years when she very easily could have lost her life, first in Gurs and later in concentration camps. She continuously escaped. She's continuously saved by other people. That is, I think, the heart and soul of the Book of Records, is all the nameless people along the way, the strangers, the brief encounters, the people who make a decision in a moment to give shelter or refuge, to act one way and not another. All those historical figures in the Book of Records survive to tell the tale because other people saved them. And those are the ones we don't remember.
Madeleine, we've been discussing this way in which the Book of Records interweaves the stories of historical figures with the story of your main character, Lena, and her father. But as Lena immerses herself in these narratives, both those in these encyclopedias that she's reading and also the narrative of how she and her father came to be in the sea, this line between the past and the present, and also the line between the real and the imaginary, perhaps the dialogue that she's having with these historical figures in her mind, that becomes blurred. Can you talk a bit about that blurriness? Because I can imagine for some readers who like a story that feels a bit more straightforward, this could be challenging to be sitting with this ambiguity of what's going on now and what's the imaginary.
Yes, I think that's true.
Not to say that's a bad thing at all. I'm just kind of imagining, like, it's a book that's been difficult for me to explain to friends of mine that have not yet read it. I'll put it that way.
Yes. Well, we have the neighbors in the sea, and these neighbors are echoes, traces, inheritors, maybe, of the primary figures, Arendt and Dufu and Spinoza. It's hard, it's ambiguous how to read the neighbors, but I think, as for me as the novelist, they are real. They are real to Lena. They are her companions, her teachers, her friends. She takes care of them in a sort of day-to-day errands. And they, along with her father, try to give her this education that she so longs to have. I think there is a blurring, but I also feel like, I really trust the reader. I don't know. I don't know that it is difficult. I think we do this all the time in our lives with film, with art. We pass through the veil. We pass through the curtain. We hold these not quite sure, uncertain, destabilized grounds beneath us. It's how we live. Mm-hmm. And I think it's okay for fiction to do that. Not all fiction necessarily needs to. I mean, I also like a good, straightforward story as much as the next one. But I honestly feel there's a hunger for something that disorients, perturbs, but will come together. And I do feel coherently that it does.
I hope you're right, and I think I believe you're right. I sometimes think in the age of AI and what I hear from my friends who are TAs and teach undergraduates, I don't always know that hunger is there. But I hope you're right, absolutely.
I think I experienced it with Do Not Say We Have Nothing. That's a 470-page novel, which is a details of 20th century Chinese history, and a history that was not that familiar to many readers. And you know, it's a fascinating story of that book being rejected by 40, 50 publishers in the United States, and the response was always, it's too ambitious. Readers are not going to be that interested. Nobody wants to know that much. And they were proved wrong. You know, and that American publication only came about when the book was nominated for the Booker.
Wow.
And it's taught in high schools. I mean, I've been to so many classes, spoken to so many students where teenagers are reading it and are giving me these incredible, you know, full-on dissertations about this novel and its structure and its complexities and its music and its politics and its and its relation to the present. So I ferociously believe there's an appetite and a need and a desire for these conversations.
That's amazing to hear. I can only hope then that, you know, future works that you've put out, Americans are a little more eager to publish and get into the hands of readers.
I think what I'm hearing in the U.S. is just how relevant it feels to the present moment. Yeah.
I agree. I think a lot of what we've been discussing today and the impressions that I took away while reading the Book of Records, I felt this has a lot to say about what it is to live in 2025. But just while we're on the subject of Do Not Say We Have Nothing, I think for folks who read that novel and then read the Book of Records, they'll see some connecting threads between the two. The title, The Book of Records, is the name of a manuscript that shows up in Do Not Say We Have Nothing. Lena talks about reuniting with this friend Marie, which is the name of the protagonist from Do Not Say We Have Nothing. Do you see these two novels as being in conversation with each other?
Yes, inevitably. Yes, always, you know. It's just as Do Not Say We Have Nothing was in deep conversation with Dogs at the Perimeter, which was about the Cambodian genocide. There's a continuity through these books. In Do Not Say We Have Nothing, the Book of Records is this manuscript copied by hand. It's a novel that seems to have no beginning and no end, that the characters copy out for each other, first for the joy, because they love this book, and then later on, as a way to hide locations and names. It becomes for them a place to keep history when the times do not allow these names and places to be entered into the official record because it's too dangerous or too sensitive. And I think in this novel, The Book of Records, it's a completely different thing, but that sort of exploration of an idea continues. You know, in Do Not Say, there's a character who says that the record is written on us. It's in our actions. It's in our bodies. It's in the way we move through the world. It's not always a written record. It's what we've taken into ourselves, which begins to determine the kinds of choices we might make. It's that kind of record I'm most interested in, I think. We were talking about ethics. What is the source of this ethics for each person? What's the separation between how we think we're acting ethically and what we're actually doing? I think across the books, there's that question about the thinking and the doing and the existing and the changing.
I want to return to this idea of the relevance of this book to the present moment, because through this novel, we see some of history's most exceptional thinkers really grappling with some quite dark circumstances with exile, with persecution because of their identity or because of the intellectual ideals that they hold. How do you see your novel speaking to our present day? And I know also the process of writing this novel was a long one and it did not get produced in the first couple months of 2025. But in what way did you feel, perhaps, as you were writing, that this novel might speak to the contemporary moment?
I started writing it in 2016. A lot has happened in our world in those 9 years. But certainly one felt that the catastrophe is always with us, whether we see it or not. It's maybe in the United States and Canada more visible now.
Mm-hmm.
The proximity is different. The acceleration and the speed at which things we might have thought had a lasting power can be dismantled. But that is true of what Hannah Arendt goes through. It's true of what Du Fu goes through. Very few people thought collapse was so near. They had to make a lot of choices. I think what I think is relevant to the moment is how we're going to choose each day, what to say, what not to say, how we are in relation to each other when we look away and when we don't. They seem like small things, but in the collective, they are huge things. It's such a hard question, Matteo, because I am a firm believer that literature is this deep conversation that is ongoing. And it's not that it suddenly makes us more empathetic, but it maybe makes us face some of the things we're most afraid of. And it helps us to find some courage in the worst times. I know that's what it's been for me. Mm-hmm. And I do think that writing about Cambodia and writing about China, both in fiction and nonfiction, writing about those who have taken incredible risk upon themselves, has made me just believe that we're there with each other, that we're not alone in these acts. And I think that hunger for literature was a good hunger. I think we turn to it because we need something to feed us and sustain us, and we know we're keeping it inside ourselves for those times when we're going to need it most.
Madeleine, before we wrap up, I want to ask about the dedication to the Book of Records, because I know it was dedicated to your best friend, Idang Trung, who passed away in 2022. Can you tell me a bit about her?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. Idang was an extraordinary person. She was a professor. She taught literature, Canadian literature. She and her family were considered or named as the last refugees when they came to Canada in the early 1980s and were welcomed by Pierre Trudeau as one of the last of the 60,000 refugees to arrive from Southeast Asia. And she grew up in Goderich, and she passed away from cancer at the age of 42. A devastation for her family who had survived the Cambodian genocide. And then she herself, Idang, had been born in a refugee camp. She was the most, I'm sorry, I'm going to get emotional.
No, of course.
She was the most incredible person. She was just a light. And I wish she was here. She's definitely one of those people who gives me courage.
I mean, her spirit, it seems, from what I know about her through your writing and through her writing, because she wrote a memoir as well.
Yes, Landbridge, yes.
It seems like her spirit is very, very alive in the Book of Records.
Yes. I hope everyone goes to read Landbridge. It's an incredible work. Incredible work. She wrote it in the last year of her life. She finished it in the last year of her life. She'd been working on it for years and years.
Well, Madeleine, it's been a real pleasure talking with you and getting to engage with all of this.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure for me too. Thank you for taking the time.
I tear up in the studio listening to Madeleine talk. And it was such a joy speaking with her about her ideas, about her family, about her friend. Madeleine Thien's new novel is called The Book of Records. And again, her friend's memoir is called Land Bridge, and that book is by Yidang Trung. This episode was produced by Katie Swales. Ailey Yamamoto is our associate producer. Our senior producer is Jacqueline Kirk, and our executive producer is Aaron Balser. Shout out to our audio tech Aronde Williams and everyone on the CBC Books team. I'm Matea Roach, and this is Bookends. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't keep it to yourself. Spread the love and share it with a fellow reader. And don't forget to follow the show and leave us a kind review if you're so inclined. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Because when the book ends, the conversation begins.